The state of our profession is in transformation. I think that's the key word is transformation. AI is disrupting everything. It's enabling everything, and it's risk and it's an opportunity, right? So I think that every conversation that I'm having, whether we're talking about geopolitics, the role of AI, how are we governing it within our organizations so that we can create a healthy way for people to experiment within our organizations? We want to have that spirit of experimentation when it comes to AI, but it has to be done in a safe way.
Hello and welcome to Building Brand Gravity. I'm Ann Green.
And I'm Steve Halsey.
And in today's episode, Steve, we're going to get into a question that feels more relevant than ever right now. And it matches a major theme we've been talking about all year. And to summarize it, companies are being asked to do more on the economy, on society, on people's lives, but they're not necessarily being believed more. Trust and confidence remain under significant pressure.
Yeah, what really stood out to me on the topic of today's episode is the fact that we're seeing not just a performance gap. I mean, it really is visibility gap, it's a credibility gap. And as you and I have talked on a number of episodes, there's this real disconnect between companies are what they're doing and whether people actually see it, understand it, or trust it. You know, when I reflect on it, kind of sounds like narrative as an operating system in play, doesn't it?
Yeah, so true. That projection of yours about narrative as an operating system being a major theme in 2026 keeps popping up. So, on this episode, we're going to talk and further unpack that through the lens of the latest Page and Harris Poll Confidence in Business Index. And you had a pretty fascinating discussion with Dr. Rochelle Ford, the CEO of Page, about the index and its implications.
Yeah, it was a great conversation, and one that I think our listeners are really going to enjoy. We get into everything from why, as they define it, the confidence curve is breaking to how expectations are shifting across generations, which is really fascinating from so many different standpoints and with so many different generations currently sitting in the workforce. We also talk about how search and AI are merging and fundamentally change how people form their opinions of the companies, often before those companies even have a chance to tell their stories. Just the way it's getting algorithmically served up before you have a chance to respond. And what I thought was interesting was many of the findings of the study actually matched what you and I were just talking about in the last mailbag episode. And for our listeners, if you missed our mailbag episode, I would encourage you to go back and listen to that one. But the study brings some really interesting cuts of data across geographies. It is global in nature. It is not just US, and across generations and generations globally, finding kind of those commonalities. And it really brings a lot of those trends we're seeing into clarity.
Yeah, and I think what I appreciate about the discussion is it goes beyond any one individual issue or hot take. Like, for example, two obvious examples. The headline is not just about AI, it's not just about geopolitical conflict. It digs into the study to get to something deeper. It's about credibility, it's about context, and it focuses on what it actually takes for companies to be understood in today's much more complex and noisy environment. And I know that's very relevant to our team and other agencies. It's very relevant to whatever kind of organization you're leading, comms, marketing, C-suite, et cetera.
Yeah, and ultimately, I think, Anna, it comes down that doing the work isn't enough anymore. You have to be able to prove it, explain it, and make it visible, or it just doesn't land with your target audiences and those who matter.
Yeah, so let's get right into it with Steve's conversation with Rochelle.
Well, welcome everybody to this episode of Building Brand Gravity. I'm Steve Halsey, one of your hosts. And with me, my esteemed guest, Dr. Rochelle Ford, CEO of the Page Society. And for those that don't know, the Page Society is the world's leading organization of chief communications officers, academics, you've got researchers, universities, not-for-profit, and all the teams that support them. Dr. Ford, welcome to the show.
Thank you. And GNS, an amazing comms team agency, phenomenal organization.
Ooh, love to hear those. Love to hear those. Well, today what we're going to do is we're going to unpack something that is really interesting. Page and the Harris poll partnered together. You guys have actually partnered together the last couple of years on your Confidence in Business Index. And this year I thought it was really interesting because it really highlighted what we're seeing as a growing gap between what people expect from companies and what they actually believe companies will deliver. Sounds like a little crisis of trust, if you ask me.
Yes, there's an ongoing crisis of trust or a lack of confidence that business can actually make an impact on the issues that are important to consumers.
So when you think about that, so this is a global study, not just U.S., it's global. And what I thought was interesting about that was you were looking at perspectives both from a macro standpoint of what you saw globally as well as within different countries, and also what you saw across generations. So I guess as a little teaser for our guests, what were some of the things that stood out most to you in this?
Yeah, so one of the most important things, and this is we're hearing all the time today, is the economy. What's in it for me, right? Consumers all over the place, they don't want to just hear that my company's doing well and it's rendering money for our stockholders, our investors, but how is the economy working for me as an individual? And that was the number one issue across every market that people wanted to hear. How is the economy working for us as individuals? And we're not doing such a good job of telling it. Like we're in business, right, to make money and to help, but how is that working for me? And that was even the theme at Davos when we kicked off the study, when we initially shared it. And it was like, it's not just for the rich and wealthy, but it's for everyday people.
And some of the stats, I just jotted it down here. You had 61% expect economic impact, but only 31% believe companies can deliver. That's a pretty stark difference there.
Oh yeah, it's a stark difference. And I think one of the real reasons is that people aren't seeing the full story. They don't know what companies are doing and what is that economic impact in my community. A lot of companies will tell, you're required by law, to have your shareholder meetings, release what your earnings are, but they're not breaking it down to what is that impact story on local communities. A lot of them have the data. They've done economic impact research and they know what it is, but have they told that story? Have they gotten it into the hands of the consumers where they find the information that they can prove it and they can explain the context around how that happened and what does that mean for you at that local level, at that state level? Of course, at your national, global level, but what does it mean locally? And the more that companies can discover that and tell that story, be able to demonstrate this is what it means for you, this is how we're making an impact in your local community, then it's going to resonate with them and probably begin to increase confidence that they're doing something. Most people aren't seeing it, and if they see it, they don't understand what they're seeing.
And one of the things I thought was really interesting looking at the study is, and I'll call it transference, it's probably the wrong term, but we've seen, during different points of time, people, what they view about corporations and corporations within that, some are more trusted than others. But you're really seeing when I hear something like, hey, I expect economic impact, that's something you would probably more, in the past, you would maybe more traditionally have applied to broader government. What are these groups doing? What are they not? What can you speak about the fact that when people are thinking, how does this impact me? They're thinking corporate and they're putting the corporate enterprise in that role. So I guess one, what's your reaction to that, whether it's transference or not? And since you represent chief communications officers, what challenge does, their remit just got a whole lot bigger, right?
So, what's happening is that one of the reasons why you're seeing corporations on the hot tables, because politicians are like, it's not our fault, it's these companies. And you're seeing the headlines over and over again that companies are not doing well, whether it's in the housing market and they're taking advantage of consumers because of the way that they're pricing things or they're buying properties. You're seeing it with the credit cards and lending, and it's the interest rates are too high and they're the ones that are setting this. And so you're having politicians call out and nearly every country, they're calling out corporations saying it's your fault that the economy is not working, pointing to the business leaders. And so if we don't own that story and begin to tell our consumers, like, I was a university president, and one of the things we wanted to know was what was the economic impact of our presence in that community? And that's what we need to be able to explain it just to regular consumers. And so you need to be able to say how you're controlling prices. How does it affect the pocketbook? How are you doing? What are you doing in terms of being job creation, which is part of the economic story? What are you doing to make sure that you're using the local resources and things that you're reinvesting into that community? All of those are stories that we can tell, but sometimes we forget to tell them. And so it's a critical thing that we really become those in-house journalists to find out what's going on, and then make sure that we're presenting that information in places that our consumers are going for to find information about our companies.
Well, I'm sold. I mean, I saw that stat and I was just thinking about the weight on the communications department. Oh my gosh, how do I tell this story of economic impact? Because a lot of times you really want to pull that down into the numbers and the details and that. But what you just said is there's a lot of ways to talk about what is our economic impact, and it's really putting on that hat and thinking about the story that we want to tell. And I think that's really important because there were two other stats I thought were really interesting. There are a lot of stats I thought were interesting, but it's what I would kind of call the broken confidence curve. And in that, you found that only 29% of those who took the survey saw both action and context. 71% said they saw very little. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so when we look at the issue of confidence, we says, how do you change confidence that companies can do something about an issue? And one is, are they seeing the actions of the corporation? And if you see the action alone, but there's no explanation behind it, confidence only raises a little bit. If you hear a story, but you actually have nothing to point to as evidence that you can prove it with action, again, confidence only rises a little bit. So you have to have the confluence of both. You have to humanize the story to show what are you doing? How is it happening? Why is this important? Where am I seeing the impact? You have to, all those, 5 W's and H they used to say in journalism school. You have to provide that context of why this matters, and then be able to point to explicit examples of what the company is actually doing. So they have to see it and they have to understand it as well. And when you do the two things together, this is kind of when you nerd out if you like statistics. It's almost a direct correlation how confidence rises. And so, but if you're just simply talking and telling beautiful stories and there's no actions, nothing concrete to point to, confidence doesn't rise. If people just see, a shovel in the ground, they don't understand what's going on. Again, confidence doesn't rise. But if you're able to tell that story and you can point to those examples for people to see it, it improves.
And a lot of those who listen and watch this podcast, they have global roles.
Mm-hmm.
So those numbers that you're talking about, you found that consistent globally, right? That whole idea of the economic expectation and that broken confidence curve.
Yeah, it was in every nation. Some of the nations I found interesting is that in some of the countries where you've seen the greatest economic growth in those countries, those are the ones that you're seeing the highest level of confidence. So you're seeing high confidence in places like the UAE. You're seeing higher confidence in places like India, where, again, great economic growth. Even in China, again, greater confidence. But in places like the United States, down to like 26% confidence. You go to a place, like Italy, on the very low end of confidence. And so it just depends upon where you are and what people are seeing and what they're feeling and what they're understanding about those changes that are happening in their communities.
Well, that makes me think then, the ability to tell that economic story, that's really kind of become the new narrative battleground, hasn't it?
Absolutely. It is a new narrative battleground. You have to humanize things. And when you put that human face onto what it matters to me, I think that actually helps. And it also helps you to break into other areas in which you can tell stories, because they're searching for information. And how do you make sure that your stories come up in their searches? How do you make sure that when they're talking to ChatGPT or some other generative AI source, that your company, that your story, your information is showing up?
So one of the challenges, I'm sure, for members of the Page Society, and I know you guys have a lot of different forums where your members are talking. How do you have that economic conversation without wading into politics or feeling political? Particularly in a lot of countries have become really hyper polarized, and that's being played out. And so you're trying to give a message about economic impact. How do you do that in a meaningful way without putting a target on your back or your front and your side? Or
Well, I don't know any country that says, how do we, dig ourselves further in the hole? So talking about your impact is not controversial. Now, our second issue that came up in this study across most markets, not all markets, but was corruption. Now, that one is a harder one to deal with in explaining how my company is helping the local community or helping that state or helping that nation to grow and to be stronger more economically. But the issue that tends to be on consumers' minds around the globe, the second issue globally was that intersection between politics and corporations. And that corruption story is a harder one to define and the one where you might get into a little bit of trouble if you're talking about corruption. And a lot of people don't want to talk about that issue, particularly in our industry, because all of us have lobbyists that we're trying to advance our causes and we're working on advocacy issues. And that becomes a little bit more difficult because you have to work within different political and social environments. But the economic impact story, the job creation story, those aren't controversial because you're trying to invest in and uplift a community, not just your shareholders.
well, and what's interesting on that corruption point was when the first study came up, it was a little bit further down on the list. Sad to say, it's coming up on the list, but I remember seeing that and thinking, oh well, that's just a third world country thing. That's somebody else's issue. Is that really that big a deal? But we are seeing that come up, and maybe you can talk a little bit about the definitions
Sure.
that you use for that, because I think that helps add context to what we're talking about. That again, some people just think corruption means, okay, I'm just paying you under the table, we're all good. In some case, that really is, but maybe you can talk about the definition, and then how do we as communicators attack that the best we can?
Yeah, so we came up with about 5 definitions. So not only did we ask, was corruption something that people are thinking about? And the answer was yes, number 2 across all of the countries that we surveyed. But we came up with 5 phases of corruption. One is the abuse of power and the misuse of authority. So what does that mean? So these are some examples of what people said about this concept of abuse of power and misuse of authority. In Mexico, they said the abuse of power is everywhere: bribes, extortion, mismanagement of public funds. In the UK, they said politicians and leaders act for themselves, not for the public. Everyone sees it. So that was the first theme of abuse of power and misuse of authority. The second phase of corruption we found was the lack of transparency, hidden deals and non-accountability. In Brazil, people said everything is hidden. No one knows where the money goes. So it's that idea of lack of transparency. Someone in the U.S. said corruption is tied to special interest groups and providing money to get their agenda passed, things that are done in the shadows. So that lack of transparency was the second phase of corruption. The third one was systematic, cultural, and everyday normalization of corruption. Like, it just happens. Everybody knows. It just happens. It's a part of life. And that idea that there's really nothing you can do about it. Someone in Italy said, corruption is just everywhere. It has always existed and it just won't disappear. Just that kind of fatalism sort of idea. Another phase of corruption was bribery and favoritism and illicit exchange, kind of the pay to play attitude. And the fifth one was social harm and inequality and hopelessness and a loss of trust in institutions. Someone in Canada said corruption is increasing and people feel powerless to stop it. So how do you then, I think the second part of your question is like, well, what should professional communicators do? Well, you have to look at your corporate governance. Like, what are the rules? What are the ethics that you have? What are the values that your company stands by? And how do you demonstrate that those things are real? How do you share where you've stopped something from happening and that you are able to say, this is what we're doing to improve and to shed light and transparency and how we make decisions or why we're doing what we do. So again, it's that restoring confidence in your company is being transparent. That's that context. This is why we did this. This is why we're not doing business here. This is why we're, how our actions and decisions are being made. And that contextual story is an important one. And what are the guardrails and what are the ethics that we're standing by? At the end of the day, what do we value as a company? And how are we living those values at every turn?
Well, it's interesting to hear you describe it that way, because one of the things I've been talking about lately, and I mentioned it to you, our last conversation, is this idea I call narrative as an operating system, right? Big N narrative, not narrative as in the messaging, that's all important. But kind of like in your vision, in your values, in things you do every day, in your DNA as a company, what you pursue, all of those things create, as you said, a contextual story around the company. So you need to make sure that what's being communicated matches what is being done. But on the flip side, you want to make sure what's being done is communicated, right?
And that's what restores. It seems so simple, but it's amazing that people don't do it. And I think as you're talking about the narrative, it's what Paige is often called, what is your corporate character, right? Who do you say that you are? Why does your business exist? What's its purpose? What's its mission? What's its vision? And what are those values? And how do you make sure that every action that the company does aligns with those values? How can you point back to that character? And then how do you then, once you're able to define that and you're able to communicate your decisions and actions and people begin to see it and they're understanding why you're doing things, then there's going to build up advocacy and people willing to be your cheerleader because they're seeing it, they're understanding it, and then they're able to advocate on your behalf.
That's a great point. One of the other things I thought was really interesting in the research was the generational divide. I guess we all don't value the same exact thing in the workplace. Can you tell us a little bit about the generational divide?
Yes, as someone who has a millennial and 2 Gen Zs in my house, I can tell you about generational divides on a regular basis and caring for my more than boomer mother, silent generation. But in our study, we particularly looked at the what are some of those main issues and then what are the differences between generations. And definitely mental health is one of those issues that stood out. You will see that Gen Z and millennials, they absolutely care and they want companies to do something about mental health issues. They have the vocabulary, they've grown up with people talking about it, it's normalized in their generation. And it's not enough for your company to say that, oh, you have mental health benefits as part of your compensation package. Like you can go to the doctor, you can go to a psychiatrist or psychologist, but they want to know, what are you doing to promote it? How are the leaders, how is my boss demonstrating that they're taking healthy lifestyle choices, that they're saying, you know what, I'm going on vacation because my brain needs a break, or I'm going to go and take a walk today, or I'm doing these healthy lifestyles that are proactively promoting mental health, or it's just as okay to have a mental health day as it is because your stomach's upset and you need to stay home. So Gen Z in particular is looking for those indicators as they enter into the workforce. And then are companies doing it and advocating for that even in the marketplace? We just had our Page Spring seminar here in New York not too long ago. And the NFL is being very, very proactive in talking about that and normalizing mental health issues. Gen Z consumers globally are looking for that. Not so much in the boomers, and many of the top issues for the baby boomer generation, mental health didn't come up in one of their top 5 issues, but they're being effective too. Oftentimes caring for their elderly parents, caring for their children and sometimes grandchildren, and they're sandwiched with stress. But we haven't normalized it to talk about it. That it's something that companies should be able to do. But that is one of the issues in particular that the younger generations want to see companies proactively doing something about.
What about the Gen Xers like me? Where did we fall?
No one cares about us. I'm a Gen Xer, and it's interesting because not only are there differences and the issues that are important to the various generations, but the media consumption habits vary greatly too, and that's where you're seeing some additional divides. And one of the beautiful things about Xers is that we kind of flow in between the two extremes. We're leaning into old media. We still consume it, but we lean into the new media and are more likely to look at the TikToks and things than, let's say, the boomer generation is. But I believe Gen X, very important people.
I'm with you. Shout out Gen X. Sometimes
yes.
we feel boomer. Sometimes we feel millennial. But I guess that also takes me another point that the research found was kind of what I would say, in some ways, authority is upside down, right? So you're seeing a key shift. Search continues to dominate. Gen AI is rising like a phoenix, a banshee, a whatever term. It is rising fast. And those two are coming together at the same time when news media is declining. Newsrooms are getting smaller and smaller. Can you talk about this behavioral shift and what does it mean?
Well, you said it just then. Behavioral shift is that we've oftentimes relied on earned media because people are going to see it in the press and people were going to watch television. They were going to the news organizations. Well, that's shifting. People are going for information on their search engines. They're still Googling information. And then what happens when you use, Google or other search information now, AI is generated as well. So not only when you're doing an active search, but you're also getting AI generated content, but people are also going directly to search engines like, or to the generative AI engines to find information. And that is increasing very rapidly among many generations, not just the younger, millennials and Gen Zs, but across the spectrum that it has nearly doubled in terms of usage and trust. And that's an important thing to know. Is for professional commuters, is pitching and earned media dead? No, because it's a cited source that absolutely informs generative AI engines. But you have to know that not only do you need to have your website's search engine optimized, now they need to be generative AI engine optimized because you want to make sure that your content appears when people are going to those AI search engines. And which ones vary also according to the country and region of the world that you're in as well. So it makes our job more challenging because you got to get the right message to the right people through the right channels at the right time. And that means that we're going to have to do a lot more in terms of segmentation of audiences and getting the stories out there.
And with the right frequency. And one of the things I think is interesting that I've been talking about, and I can't divulge the company, but I'm in the middle of it. We built a few months ago, we built a crisis plan for them that was large language model first. And it was really structured to all the things we're talking about, demonstrating that economic impact, demonstrating corporate governance, really leaning into the issues where they were saying, hey, this is where we may be of risk. But they've really accepted that viewpoint of, all right, let's make this stuff out because when the crisis hits, before a human writes an article, anybody that searches the AI is going to pull it. And if we don't have that information out there, guess what information is being pulled? Not ours, and that doesn't allow us to be part of the narrative. And just over the past couple of weeks, unfortunately, they had an issue hit. But what we were seeing in AI and in search was very much in line with that. And it's not manipulating the algorithm or anything like that. It's just being prepared to put that information out there for that initial wave. But then the other thing I think a lot of people forget when it comes to generative AI, it's not a set and forget. It's not say it once and it goes away. I had Greg Galen's been on the podcast a number of times, and Muckrack last year, they did some research. They did 1 million queries in Claude, Gemini, Chat, and all of that. And you know what they found the most quoted source was? News. And when it sourced? Yesterday. Yesterday was the most referenced thing that came up in search. So to your points, yes, that creates a lot of challenges for us as communicators. But I look at that and says, but that means we need to be communicating a lot of places all the time.
Absolutely. we have to be thinking about getting our, continuing to tell our stories through, through the news, whether it's print, radio, what have you, but also through podcasts and thinking even about the rankings and stuff like what is the best restaurant. Those things are important in people finding information. And when you are, so our job to make sure as communicators is to continue to look towards those earned media opportunities, but also not forget about things like YouTube, right? And making sure that our stories are being told visually, because YouTube was the number two source for many, many individuals as a place that they're going for information. And also they're still using social media. So those are still critical sources that are being used. But when it comes to finding things through through those generative AI tools, whether it's ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or what have you, absolutely, it's about the citation. So how do you get your information cited by others, and then making sure that it can hopefully be found? But you said something earlier when you walk into that crisis, is that if they don't find your current information, they're going to quote old information. So you need to be going through and asking those queries about the issues and things that your company is involved in and finding where old information might be. And then you begin to start making corrections and make sure that you are covering it with currency so that it will, some of those things, they don't ever go away, but hopefully won't be as discoverable.
Yeah, we do a lot of business in agriculture. Actually, our firm was founded in 1971 as an ag communications firm in Midtown Manhattan. And on my first day, I'm like, why would an ag firm be found in Midtown Manhattan? And they said, well, that's where all the media was in the days. Made sense. But we've got a study that we're doing that we're going to be releasing in June, AI in agriculture, just looking at different views from the farmer's view to retailers, and just how do you use it from generative AI to equipments and all that, because some of the stuff being done by the big equipment companies is amazing, the amount of technology that goes into the acre. But I remember asking the question at the start of this, say, well, a lot of the demographics of your average farmer is about 60 years old. They've been farming this for a long time. I'm like, what do we anticipate, about their AI adoption? And, one of the digital people that's deep into ag said, well, you got to look at it this way, Steve. They said, every time you pick up your smartphone and you make a query, what's the first thing you see is the AI summary. So whether you love it, hate it, want it, or resistant to it, it starts preconditioning you to understand the value of AI. And so what's interesting to me is you look at an industry like that is very much about your trusted advisors, and very much about what do you see in the field, and very much about the science. And to see the shifts among all audiences, a little preview for what's coming up, but to see the shifts in adoptions, particularly where you don't expect it, because it becomes very intuitive. But I think one of the other things is there's also a point where the AI, this whole conversation we have about trust, I'll use it to find the information, but when it comes to make that decision, I want a trusted source. I want a trusted counselor. And I think that's a really important thing when you think about the chief communications officer role as well. It's not I'm going to build a beautiful machine and I'm going to go sit on the beach, call me if it breaks, right? It's got to be at the key points, that trusted counsel.
Absolutely. So one of the key things that was emphasized actually last week at the World Economy that Semaphore hosted, 400, we talked about Davos, but there were 400 CEOs in Washington, D.C. last week. I know, every place you turned, there was a CEO. But they were on the stage being interviewed by journalists.
I'm sorry, I got to ask you this. Was it like the scene in Spies Like Us? Remember, doctor, CEO? And where you sit, you're like, CEO?
Yeah, I guess I could have said CEO. No, I guess I could have, but I don't think of myself quite like, some of the folks who are on the stage of heading up major insurance companies and credit card companies and car companies and all. But if you let me increase your dues, I will, no, I didn't say that. That was a bad joke. On a serious note, though, what they were saying across the board is you can't leave the human out of AI. So absolutely, it'll make you faster, sometimes a lot more efficient, which is a lot of the reasons why farmers and others are doing it, because what it would have taken, goo gobs of time to go out to the field and observe things, you can observe it, much more efficiently using AI tools, what have you. But what it enables you to have efficiencies, help to speed things up. What it doesn't do is have that human level of judgment and the conversations that are not picked up by AI, the experience that you're drawn on, and what does it actually feel like to be in that moment. Most of those things are not recorded in anything that an AI agent could pick up.
Mhm.
So what you as a human, you can have faster research done, you can have first drafts of stories done, but you as a human have to be able to bring what AI cannot observe in the environment, your experiences, that feeling, those emotions, and you pull that into the strategy. That can't be replaced because there's so much that an AI agent does not get to actually consume that the human mind does, and that creativity brought to the table to solve real problems.
Yeah, and I think that's important. I've really been in the conversations I'm having saying I don't believe in human in the loop.
Mm-hmm.
I believe in human as architect,
Mm-hmm.
and that's really kind of what you're describing that I think is important. So to move on a couple of things. Okay, so we've thrown out a lot of thoughts there. We've thrown out a lot of challenges for communicators. But you had kind of put together a 4-step plan for what companies must do now in terms of owning the economic narrative, calibrating by generation, showing action and context, and modernizing the channel mix. That's what we've talked about. How do we implement this four-step plan for success?
Sure. So you have to own your own narrative, right? It begins with you. You need to know what your company is doing, and whether it's on the economic story, whether it's on the mental health story, it's on job creation or innovation stories. What is your company doing? You have to own your narrative. And if you don't, then recognize that some savvy politician is going to take that story away from you. And so it's not a hypothetical risk, it's something that you need to do now. And that means we got to do our homework, right? We have to do our homework and making sure that we're able to not only tell the story, but when we have a seat at the table, which most of our chief comms officers do, then we have to have that enterprise thinking hat on. What are we actually doing about this? Why are we doing this? So that we can show it and then we can explain it with that context. But then when we're thinking about mining that generational gap, we have to really calibrate what issues that we're talking about and where's the media, where are consumers going that they are using it and that they're trusting it for information about business. And so we have to make sure that we are recognizing the differences in the generations and what they are talking about, as well as the differences that you see in different global markets. That's part of that mining that generation. And then when we're thinking about proving it with action, again, you have to show that context, you have to show the action that you're doing, and then you got to modernize that mix, right? It's not your grandmother's public relations, right? It's more complex, it's more nuanced, and you have to lean into who are you trying to reach and how do you make sure that we start with that own content, because that's the foundation of what we do. If no, it was an amazing, so real life, pretty current here. When we were gearing up, we're the first days of the war over in Iran and in the Middle East with Israel and the rest of the U.S. involvement in it. A lot of our members are like, what is going to be the central source of truth? It's our website and the government website. How do we keep what's current? Send people to where the information is, where you can be trusted, and reiterate that. So your own content, even in the crisis of a war, is critical to that. What the truth is getting out, and you can keep pointing back to it, but making sure that you use a whole host of other multiple channels that are where your consumers are, where your employees are, and you're reaching them where they are, telling real stories, proving it there. And I think it can be a recipe for success, but it takes some effort. Even laggards like me, sometimes you don't want to use AI. because I'm old-ish.
Hmm. Well, and I think there's amazing findings, and we're gonna put in here in the channel where you can get the research for the Page Harris poll stuff. But I wanted to spend the last couple of minutes, unless there's something you want to talk here, I wanted to just ask you about a little bit of what you're seeing since you've taken over Page. You've been on a whirlwind tour. I've seen you in Europe. I've seen you a lot of places in the world we've run into. But you've really been on a listening tour, traveling the globe, talking to chief communications officers, talking to academics, researchers, all of their teams. What are you finding? What are you hearing in addition to the research? What's the state of our profession?
Our state of our profession is in transformation. I think that's the key word is transformation. AI is disrupting everything. It's enabling everything. And it's a risk and it's an opportunity, right? So I think that every conversation that I'm having, whether we're talking about geopolitics, the role of AI, how are we governing it within our organizations so that we can create a healthy way for people to experiment within our organizations? We want to have that spirit of experimentation when it comes to AI, but it has to be done in a safe way, right? And so that governance issue with regards to AI. What are the tools that I can use that's going to help me to be more efficient, right? To be more effective in what I do. And then by using it for those efficiency opportunities, how is that going to transform the structure of my organizations? Everyone is looking at what roles can I replace and what are the new roles I need to add on? Is it we also think about the communication channels. Is it bots talking to bots, which a lot of it is? And how do I know that it's a real human behind that? Or is it another AI agent that is hallucinating, is now spreading mis and disinformation, or someone intentionally putting it into that stream? So it's about the upskilling of talent. It's the rethinking of how we're structured and what are the tools that we're going to use. And then when you think about those tools, because all of us are on this learning journey, how do I know this is a reputable partner to work with? Because you're going to get bombarded. And what do I really need? What do I not need? And those decisions that are being made. And so you're thinking about it in terms of your upskilling. You're thinking about how you communicate, just like we were talking about in the study. People are trying to make sure that how they are disseminating messages, how they are listening to figure out what folks are saying about them. All of that is AI. So every aspect that we touch, right? Should we have an AI agent as our CEO? Should we put their avatar up and ask questions? Well, that goes back to governance and ethics. It loops back around. So AI is coming up in every single conversation, whether it's internal, external, whether you're talking to people in Japan or Singapore or in England or in the Netherlands or here in the US or Brazil or Canada. It's coming up in every conversation.
Well, and as I really think about it, I talk about the impact of AI really having kind of three components, right? One is the competency, right? Do I have the competency to learn, to really make it work the way I can? In some cases, yes, it's about efficiency. In some ways, it's helped me do this better and put guardrails. In other cases, it's to create new IP. So competency is definitely part of it. Then becomes relevancy. If I'm not competent, I'm not going to be relevant for very long in our profession. So that's a really core part of it. And then I think really that third level is leadership. It's really becoming a leadership test for companies, for agencies, to just really think about this next steps and to really use it to define value. Who's going to define value of what's next, I think is going to be really important. So, okay, so you can't escape AI. What else? Favorite meal, best food? What else are you seeing in your global travels that changed your mind that you didn't expect when you came into this role?
So this is probably just totally irrelevant to much of anything. But when I was in Denmark, I was sitting in a cafe and I was looking around and I'm like, people are really tall here. And I realized how short I am. And I never thought about which countries have really tall people and which countries have really short people. until I started hanging out with more of our European members. And they are, whether it's the Netherlands or the Nordic region, they're a lot taller than me. But that's probably not what you were looking for.
Yeah, I asked for reflections. I remember like one of my reflections about international travel. Somebody's like, "What's it like?" I'm like, "Well, you fly a long way and you're in a cab and you're in a windowless conference room and you do a really good dinner and you go back to a windowless conference room. You get in a cab, you get on a plane." I said, "But the strange thing is when you wake is when you're in a cab in a strange city and it doesn't feel weird anymore to you." But I think that's the amazing part of this profession is, the opportunity to see so much and,
Yes.
and interact so much. And I do really want to thank you for coming on the show. You've been a good friend. You've been a good mentor of all of us. We love what you're doing in terms of where you're steering and challenging Paige for what's next. And I hope to have you back on the show when you have next year's findings, and hopefully we can take that corruption thing and make it go down a little bit.
I really, really hope so. I think that it is possible. And Steve, I really appreciate all that you continue to do, because one thing about our industry is that the more that we all lean in and give that spirit of generosity, it elevates us all. We learn from each other. It's our peer community that makes us stronger. And we're so fortunate to have you as part of our community, and you make us stronger every day. So thank you for all that you do.
Well, I appreciate, and we will wrap on that. So thank you for joining us for this episode of Building Brand Gravity. Please come back for more exciting conversations and lively conversations like the one I just had with Dr. Ford. Everybody, have a great day.